All right, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. We just spoke with Candy Alexander from Nuion on the topic of MSSPs securing buy-in from their clients by speaking their business language. If you missed it, I would strongly encourage you to go back and watch. But right now, it's time for our InfoSec news and trends topic of the day, presenting our big idea in security. No matter how well constructed an MSSP security architecture is, or how tight its security controls are, all that good work can be wasted or sabotaged far too easily when the client organization fails to follow standard cybersecurity hygiene practices. Just because a company uses a managed security provider to bolster its cyber preparedness, it doesn't mean they still don't have a responsibility to promote security awareness across their workforce and institute some basic cyber governance policies. So in this segment, Cyber for Hire is going to seek to identify and find potential solutions for addressing users' key security awareness failings, because at the end of the day, security must be a two-way street. And for this discussion, I'd like to welcome back my co-host Ryan Morris, Principal Consultant at Morris Management Partners. Ryan, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Bradley.
So Ryan, maybe is there a good example that jumps to mind that you personally experienced or witnessed of seeing an MSP's client organization completely undermine the hard work that the MSSP did due to some kind of a poor hygiene practice?
Unfortunately, there are more answers than we have time to get into today, more examples of just all the best laid plans and super sophisticated advanced cybersecurity strategies that are undermined by the simplest behavioral challenges, right? Think of it like this. The CEO of an organization doesn't want to be inconvenienced in the middle of his very busy schedule. And so, inconvenient things like MFA and VPN when he's dialing in on a personal device, those things, that's for the smaller people in the organization. And therefore, I don't need to comply with these. I mean, I'm the boss after all, right? You can't tell me what to do. And I become not only a very open door for all the bad guys to come walking through, but I also happen to be the one person in the organization who possesses the highest concentration of the highest value information that we have or will ever generate. I am not only the most frequent vulnerability, I'm also the most costly vulnerability in the body of a single human being. Now, you can, again, sense through my tone here that we've seen and heard this so many times. And I'll begin, rather than being sarcastic through this whole conversation, I'll begin from a position of grace. And I will say, I believe that most of the mistakes that we see where human behavior undermines legitimate rocket science integration on the cybersecurity side, most of them are accidents, right? I will say that we all know the statistics that the vast majority of security breaches and vulnerabilities happen on the inside of an organization, not as a result of external hackers or ransomware or bad behavior from any nation state or other individual, right? Most of the time it's internal, but most of the time it's also accidental, right? It will occasionally be mean-spirited. It will occasionally be legitimately bad intentions where people are trying to cause harms. But most of the time, it's just because, we haven't trained our people well enough, frequently enough, recently enough that they remember in the midst of their very busy day, while they're doing their job, which is probably complicated and challenging, don't click on that thing, right? Like, here are basic cyber hygiene behaviors. Here are things that you ought to be paying attention to in emails that you receive, turns of phrase and keywords and links to external resources, right? We take it fundamentally for granted in the industry that these things are obvious and anyone with a pulse would know better than to do these basic things. But then we have to remember, like, literally 99% of the people in our organization do not work in IT, and 99% of the IT people do not work in cybersecurity, right? What we take fundamentally for granted as obvious is actually not obvious to the wider world. And as a result, we see just, again, The kudos go to the business. We invest a ton of money in technology. We buy systems and resources. We hire teams. We deploy very sophisticated cybersecurity solutions. And it's simple stuff like me in the sales organization clicking on a thing that I shouldn't click on that brings down the whole house of cards. That's a massive challenge for us in the industry as well as for our end users.
Ryan, I grant you that in a lot of cases, right, it's something that's relatively accidental, and a mistake was made in good faith. Certainly, I'm sure there have been times, however, where you might have a client organization that is fairly negligent in terms of really establishing proper security awareness and hygiene throughout their organization. And then when an incident does happen and it's time for the blame game, right, what do? They blame the MSSP for somehow allowing this incident to happen, even though really it's a shared responsibility and some of the onus is still on them to have certain basic protections in place. So what do you personally find are some of the most common significant failings on the client side when it comes to negligent cyber hygiene?
See, and again, inside those cases where we've all done our very, very best and we give everybody the benefit of the doubt, we still have it rises to the level of a fiduciary responsibility with our clients to protect their systems and assets, whether or not they believe that an individual threat or a vulnerability rises to the level of something that is absolutely critically important. I will say that to your specific question, it is still a question of shared responsibility. And the biggest problems that we see in cyber hygiene come from partly the approach and the sales message that we use as service providers, and then partly the continuous seeking for another budget efficiency on the side of the customer. Let me explain what I mean by those two things. As service providers, we have an unfortunate tendency to overpromise in order to convince a skeptical customer to say yes and sign on the dotted line. We struggle in the sales conversation, right? No sales guy bats 1,000. Nobody wins 100% of the opportunities that they're in. And in fact, when we are in a competitive environment, in an uncertain economic environment, and when we might be growing or new to the world of cybersecurity, we get a lot more no's than we get yeses. And as a result, we think, well, in order to get a yes, I'm going to have to do something that is so gargantuan, so big, make a promise that is so undeniable that the customer cannot possibly say no. And you hear that in the tone of sales pitches that come across like, we will give you 100% certainty in business operations. We will create an infallible security barrier around your organization. We will give you total confidence and control. You and I know that total everything everywhere is not only not possible, but those are the least believable words that you might ever hear in a sales pitch. If you promise me perfection, I know that you are overpromising, and now I start to approach your pitch a lot more cynically. But we do that to ourselves, right? We approach the customer in such a way where when we feel that rejection, when we've heard 27 no's in a row, and we desperately need to get a yes, we will promise them the sun, the moon, the stars, and perfect cybersecurity just to get in the door. That leads to two things on the side of the customer, right? On one side, they might actually believe us, and with total naive innocence, go into this relationship thinking, I don't have to do anything. It's not responsible. It's not mission critical for me to actually do the cyber hygiene, the training for my individuals, because that guy's got it over there. He's great. Did you hear what he said? Everything is perfect and their services are infallible. We're fine. So this is just a trivia. It's just an afterthought, right? I don't need to do anything. Or more cynically, what they look at and say is, I heard you say that you've got this and that everything is fine. So what I'm going to do is look around my budget and find areas where I can slice off expenses that I believe to be discretionary and that I can shift the risk for onto somebody else. And you, Mr. Cybersecurity Provider, just volunteered for me to shift some risk over to you. Because if I can point to your sales collateral, if I can point to the conversations that we have had, the emails that you have sent me, and point out specific language that indicates you think everything is perfect, then any reasonable person in a court of law could be believed when they say, I thought he had it. Why would I need to pay extra for cyber hygiene? The solution to this is we need to, be much more we need to be much more specific in what we promise. Do not overpromise. Promise exactly what you do and be clear about the things you do not do and the responsibilities that stay with the customer. There is no such thing as a 100% relationship in cybersecurity, so never let that enter the conversation. Before you sign a contract, communicate clearly to the customer that hygiene is the undoing of every good intention and big dollar investment we make in cyber infrastructure. And it is on the customer to make sure that they are there. Now, do they have to buy the cyber hygiene training, security awareness training from me? I mean, I would love it if they did, but even if they don't, I'm going to need an assurance in writing accompanied by a legally validated signature that indicates you know that this is your responsibility, that the success of our venture in this joint activity depends on you fulfilling your responsibilities, and that if you choose not to get that from me, you will commit to own the legal responsibility that you will get it from somewhere. Not only get it, but you will document it, you will validate it, you will vouch for it, such that we can operate jointly in an environment where we say, I did my job, you did your job, we're both in this together.
That makes sense, Ryan. It's a great recommendation because you certainly do want your client to have the understanding that they play a role and have a responsibility as well. This leads nicely into the next question that I want to ask you, which is, are there certain key minimum expectations that an MSSP needs to lay out for the client to say, if we're going to work together, at the very least, here's what you need to do in the hygiene department? You know, we've had discussions in the past, Ryan, about certain minimum needs to qualify or be eligible for something like a cyber insurance. So this is almost a similar type question where we're talking about whether the MSSP relationship can even move forward as a business relationship based on meeting certain minimum expectations. What would some of those minimum expectations be from your perspective that you think would be most important to emphasize? And by the way, is there ever a scenario where maybe you decline to get into a business relationship with this client because they just pose too much of a risk factor if you're willing to give up the potential revenue there?
Yeah, you know what? You made two incredibly important points there in your question. Number one is that we are maturing as an industry and basic expectations are now being codified for us, right? Historically, like you said, we've had many debates around the industry about what is acceptable, what is best practice, what is minimum standard, right? There's many people who will say perfection is the minimum acceptable standard because no breach is ever acceptable. Like, I get you, cowboy. I totally understand why that's a good idea, but that's not realistic. And so we continue to debate. But the government is setting low-end expectations, baseline minimums via the context of regulations and the enforcement of those regulations, right? If you look across various vertical industries, we are seeing that the responsibility to maintain basic security and information privacy is being recognized wide in general society beyond the IT industry, that falls to the service provider and their decision maker. We possess the information. It is our active responsibility to protect that information, to prevent it from being disclosed or accessed in any unauthorized manner. But to your point, the higher end of the spectrum is being set now by the cyber insurance industry, right? If government regulations establish a minimum expected standard, you're getting a much more realistic calculation of what you are practically required to do from your cyber insurance provider. 3 years ago, your cyber insurance provider would have said, hey, if you can vouch for you got a guy over there that does IT and is responsible for security, check the box. Here's your policy. Please pay me my monthly premium. They're no longer tolerating such lax approaches to cybersecurity. The expectations are radically accelerated from what they were in 2018, 2019. I believe appropriately so. And I think we can say confidently, there's a prediction here that we can go a step further and say within 2 years, most end users will not qualify for cyber insurance because they refuse to meet what those standards and expectations are. I will say in a very tangible way, it must be training for every single human in the organization, whether they have a white collar job, a blue collar job, at a terminal, at a keyboard, in the manufacturing facility. I don't care. 100% training for every single human in the organization. Number two, the policies for cyber hygiene must be written, documented, transmitted, and accepted by every one of those human beings. If you have a policy, that's nice. If it's not written down, you don't have a policy. If it's not transmitted, accepted, and verified in writing by every single human, you do not have a cybersecurity policy. And no matter how much work you do with good intentions, you will not have the protection of the law on the back end of this thing. The third thing is, and I believe, again, it is repetition. Everybody documented with frequency and consistency, right? You cannot learn all this in one fell swoop. This is an evergreen challenge that requires a continuous level of service. Doesn't have to be every single day that every single person gets trained, but every single person must be trained on cyber hygiene more than one time per year with the documentation to go with it. Who participated? What were the findings? Who failed the test? Who passed the test? What was the remediation taken when we failed the test, et cetera, right? Those are the three, I believe, absolutely fundamental things that can be added to what you and I would rightfully call a fundamental multi-layer approach to cybersecurity, right? Whatever tools we deploy, whatever technologies we use, these three things are absolutely mandatory beyond it. To finish with your final point in the question, are there customers who refuse to do these things that you should walk away from? Absolutely, positively, yes. Okay. I know it's hard out there. I know sales is complicated and that we are often so eager, as I started out with, to win another new customer that we're willing to promise them anything to get them onto a contract. But a bad customer who refuses consciously to comply with hygiene requirements, it's not only if they will cause you a problem in the relationship and the serviceability of that client and the raw expense of human manpower as well as recovery urgent services. It's not a question of if. It is a question of when, and that's just bad business. You should believe your own sales pitch when it comes to this, right? We sell cyber hygiene services because they are a mandatory complement to whatever the best technologies are capable of accomplishing. That's a good thing, right? We want those things to be in place. Well, if we're selling it to the customer that it's vital to their success, well, then we actually have to stand behind that sales pitch and say, if you do not agree to go forward with documentation and activity around cyber hygiene, I can't do business with you because I told you it's vital. And I wasn't kidding. I wasn't exaggerating in that situation. Either you do the human part of cybersecurity or we cannot accept the liability for this relationship.
Ryan, with the last couple of minutes that we have for this segment, let me just dig a little bit deeper on those three categories of must-haves that you mentioned. For any particular MSSP client relationship, maybe what falls under the list of must-have cyber policies and must-have cybersecurity training could be a little different depending on each case scenario, but are certain things just absolutely universal in your mind? Like, for example, for training, it's got to at least include, standard anti-phishing, anti-BEC social engineering training? For policies, does it absolutely universally, no matter what, have to include some form of MFA? Name maybe one or two things that just have to be in any lesson plan, regardless of whether you're providing it or they're going through another vendor service for that kind of training or policy.
Absolutely. And this is where it does spin off into infinite iterations, right? Because while we can say you must have training, you must have documentation, and it must be repetitious, what's the content inside of that machine? Well, you might prefer one topic, I might prefer another. You might have had past experience as a client with a bad situation, and therefore that is top of mind in your priorities. I might look at that and say, well, there's a simple switch that I flipped in the software platform that eliminates that. I don't feel like I need to train you on that. I don't think it's a question of the things that we absolutely must include in training. I think it's, in fact, a question of awareness of A, why cybersecurity matters, B, what is the role of the human in maintaining cybersecurity, and C, what are the potential business impacts if we fail to live up to this, right? It's such a fundamental dynamic of human learning that we want to get into the what and get down into the details of how, but we skip over the question of why. And in my experience in training executives, training salespeople, training individual users over the decades, I am here to tell you, if they do not believe the why, they will never buy in to the what and the how, right? Even if the steps are simple, even if the consequences are massive, if you didn't convince me why I should be paying attention, what impact it has on me, not just the organization, but what's in it for me as a human. If you can't convince me of the why first, then everything else is just Charlie Brown's school teacher and parents, right? Like we're in the room with you. You're talking and telling us things, and I'm going to check that box and say I went to security training, but want. That's all I hear in the background because you didn't make it matter to me. And I've seen hundreds of cyber hygiene training curriculums. I've seen the training materials. I've sat through enough of these things. I have created content myself. If it doesn't begin with why, then nobody else cares about the what and the how, right? Once you get into the what and the how, the one thing that I have found to be absolutely essential in the content is, if you will, a guided concierge tour of all the investments that the company has already made to date to make sure that we are dealing with this problem around the humans, right? Nobody, as a single individual, wants to be told, we're going to go out of business if anything happens in cybersecurity. If we get a breach at all, we're all toast and you need to find a new job. And by the way, it's all on you. Like, nobody is going to accept that transfer of risk from their own employer. What we have to do is to tell them, you play a vital role in this process, but let me show you all of the things I have done, all of the dollars that I have spent, the massive commitments to technology, to people, to process, to deal with this problem. This is what we are bringing to the table. I need you to bring a commensurate level of maturity and awareness and commitment to your responsibility in this situation. Also, you and I have talked about this before, and we know you can't finish the human part of a conversation around cybersecurity without coming back to say, please don't use fear as the training mechanism. You cannot scare your people into compliance. You cannot frighten them into never having bad cyber hygiene behavior. You must motivate with positive reward and opportunity and realistic, attainable benefits. If you make it about fear, the humans are just going to tune you out on purpose. Because you know what? My job's hard enough. I don't need my boss coming in here and telling me, by the way, the sky is falling and it's your fault. Not cool, right? Let's make sure we are as optimistic as we can be. But let's give them a guided tour of, hey, we're not putting this all on you. We're doing our jobs over here as well. I just need you to do your part to take it the last mile. That is where we get the valid responses from. But like you and I know, we can't solve this entire problem all at once in a 20-minute conversation. So we want to invite all of the listeners to send us your ideas. Cyber4Hire at cyberriskalliance.com. That's our email address, and we would love to get some input from you guys. What do you require in terms of training and hygiene for the human factor inside your clients? What elements of content and curriculum do you think are absolutely mandatory? What kinds of fun stories do you have about people who said, oh no, I hear you, I totally agree, and then they just don't do what they've committed to do in terms of cyber hygiene? Send us your examples. We will come back to this topic. We will aggregate all of this information, and we'll come back with what we think is a more and more complete approach to solving the human challenges in cybersecurity hygiene. Okay? But before we do that, now that we are at the end of this conversation, Bradley, we want to switch out of our big idea in security and into a segment that we refer to as Dear Cyber for Hire. Every week we come back to the world of cybersecurity, and we understand that for all the technology and for all the tools that we have invested, software is not going to solve the problem. It comes down to the humans and to the relationships that service providers have with their end clients. And we also know those relationships are not always smooth and rosy and happy. So we want to get inside of that and find some challenges that you might be dealing with in the real world and see if we can give some advice to help you improve the relationship factor of your cybersecurity service practice. Now, the situation that we're going to introduce here, we have changed a couple of the details to anonymize and protect the innocent, but we do want you to know that the conflict that's represented here is very real, and it's something that you and others have probably faced out there in the real world. So with that caveat that we've placed at the front of our conversation, Bradley, where can Dear Cyber for Hire help with the service provider relationships?
Well, we've got an interesting one today. As always, Ryan, this one comes from the client side of the relationship, and it goes a little something like this. Dear Cyber for Hire, it's like I don't even recognize my MSSP partner anymore. This isn't the person I agreed to spend my future with. And I mean that quite literally. You see, my cyber services provider keeps changing my account manager. And every time it's a massive disruption. Just when I think we're clicking, that we're acting as one entity with the same vision of a beautiful, secure future. My manager leaves me in the cold, and I have to start all over again with someone new. It's starting to feel like I'm starring in that movie, 50 First Dates. Except, this is not a role I ever accepted. Please help. I'm starting to have abandonment issues here. Sincerely, Seeking Stability in St. Louis. Ryan, quite a conundrum. What do we do?
Yes, such an excellent question and a very important topic. Right now, let's look at this from both sides of the relationship. As the service provider, people come and go. I have employees. Sometimes they get promoted. Sometimes they leave and get other jobs. Sometimes I ask them to leave the organization. And that is never going to be an easy thing. So in order to keep my own human resources challenges under control, it is often necessary that I will switch the human who is responsible for individual customer relationships. I get it from the service provider's point of view. I know that it is nearly impossible to guarantee continuity with humans. You might have some people on your team who've been here for 2, 5, 10, 27 years, right? I know some cybersecurity professionals who have been at the same provider, who've been working with the same customers for more than 2 decades. That's cool, but that's unbelievably rare. Humans change, and we need to keep up with this. Now, again, it's realistic, it's necessary, it is something that can be a good thing if we feel like our representative is underserving the customer or not meeting our expectations for the quality of account control or the opportunities for expansion and retention in that paying relationship. I get it, right? But when we do research to the end user and we ask the questions, what are the things that your cybersecurity service providers do that reduce your satisfaction, that cause you problems, and that you have very strenuous feelings, you want them to stop doing those things. Right? We've been asking these questions for years at the end user level. And the one consistent reality is that the single most disruptive thing that we can do to a customer is to change their account manager. I know you sometimes have to change the account manager. I know sometimes it's not a voluntary thing. But whenever it happens, you need to appreciate the impact and the ripple effect it will have on your customer. This is not just switching a human and changing email addresses. This is not just, I used to work with Dave and now I'm working with Sally and I have to teach Sally about, some of the things and I just need to get to know her working style. Those are the cute kind of rom-com level problems that we anticipate when it comes to the question of continuity and account management. Usually it is a question of, number one, there are fundamental operating procedures and expectations, cadence of meetings, delivery of reports and updates, and other baseline contract committed relationships that need to be re-educated before we can get into this relationship. And unfortunately, the clients tell us service providers almost never do that due diligence before they make the switch. They basically use the paid commitment as a funded internship to bring your employee up to speed on my business. That is not acceptable to the customer. Beyond that, there are questions of actual systems access, right? You might be introducing a cyber vulnerability, ironically, when you change a human who might have had access to the customer's systems in ways that are necessary to sustain the service that we provide. But also you are going to be losing credibility with decision makers, right? Even if the new person you put on the account is bigger, better, faster than the person they are replacing, relationships create trust, and trust is the foundation of credibility. If we make recommendations, if we deliver bad news, if we deliver good news and tell the customer we want to expand our relationship, every one of those conversations comes down to a question of trust. And if you're a new account manager in my world, I don't trust you. And it's not that I don't say that maliciously, right? I'm not going out of my way to say, I don't like you, I don't trust you, I don't want you on my account. I might, in the very most complimentary way, say, the service you provide to me is absolutely mission critical to my success. I need what you do. I like the way that it is done. And you just changed it on me and you made my job harder in the process. That is not something that we can foist off onto the customer when we're going through the process.
Sound advice there, Ryan. It sounds like what the bottom line is here is that if you do have to switch account managers, make sure that the reason is a justifiable one. And then certainly if you're going to do it, then you have to take the steps to maintain the continuity of relationship like you've spoken about. So hopefully our listeners have learned from this and won't make the same mistake themselves. Remember, if you've been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or the provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might use your letter in a future episode. Well, as any security practitioner can tell you, there's no shortage of headlines filling up the cyber news feeds every single day. And so we wanted to highlight a few items that we curated just for you. So we present to you the security detail. All right, jumping right into things here. Headline number one is for you, Ryan. The bots are coming for LinkedIn, adding new layers of risk for professionals and for companies, and especially for recruiters.
So this is not a new challenge. It's unfortunately just newly on the top of everyone's mind in the world of LinkedIn. Without getting into the details of the analysis, what I will say is that we need to remember that 3 of the 4 fundamental purposes for why LinkedIn exists are reasons that a user would be on there and not disclose their behavior to their current employer. What that does, whether I'm searching for a new job, whether I am talking with my peers about whether this is the right company that I ought to be with, et cetera, right? There are some fundamental purposes for why we are on LinkedIn. And one of them is recruiting new employees. Well, if that's a human and I want to recruit them, that's cool. If that's a bot, I might not only not be getting a good result in recruiting, but I might also be, I don't know, introducing ransomware into my system with the best of intentions. This is a very big problem because the users of LinkedIn are not cybersecurity professionals, unless it's the cybersecurity people who are looking for a new job and doing professional networking. This rises to a very high level of vulnerability, and it's something that I think everyone needs to be paying attention to. The good news is LinkedIn says, hey, we've got systems and automation in place to deal with these things. I don't believe that's going to solve the problem. So this is another on the stack of challenges that the security team needs to be paying attention to on the service provider side. So we'll come back to that one in more detail. But Brett, want to move over to our second headline for your analysis. The AI chatbot, ChatGPT, we all have heard about it. We've probably asked it some interesting questions ourselves, but what we're learning is this thing is pretty fluent and it can break down barriers for security professionals, but also, for malicious hackers. What are your thoughts and what do we need to know about this, Bradley?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I mean, I think SC Media, a senior editor, Derek Johnson, put it very nicely, actually, in a recent article, noting that the chatbot has been compared in some security circles to things like Cobalt Strike and Metasploit in tools that can be used legitimately, but also for exploitative purposes. So on the good side, white hats can use this new AI chatbot to generate phishing simulation emails that might be more realistic, or to discover vulnerabilities. But on the other hand, adversaries can use it to craft real phishing emails or generate code that might evade certain defenses. And AI has already been used to some extent to craft some phishing emails, but this could really take the process even further. One source of mine, Lomi Ovadiah, who is the SVP of Research and Development at Ironscales, recently told me via email that ChatGPT can be the base for phishing models used to generate phishing emails. You can use it to generate a phishing email and then give it a seed number, and each time it's going to generate a completely different email, unlike now where it's a more deterministic model and you get the same exact output. So it's going to be a challenge to detect and remediate these very dynamic type of phishing attacks. One other thing worth noting, too, from the SE Media article is that ChatGPT's parameters, while it's supposed to prevent its parameters, built-in rules, from doing anything that is outright malicious, there are easy ways to basically socially engineer it to do something bad by just asking it to indirectly do some things which could ultimately result in the creation or launching of malware. There was another security researcher from Pica Security who basically said it was the equivalent of instead of asking a 3D printer to print a gun, you're just asking it to print a barrel, a magazine, a grip, and a trigger all together, and then you just put it together and you make the gun. So it's going to be a challenging tool in the future to defend against, but also could be a tool used for good as well. All right, headline number 3 for you, Ryan. The CISO role is evolving to require more emphasis on leadership and communication skills.
This is absolutely correct and appropriate that we evolve with our skills to not only talk to the blinking lights in the data center, but also to explain what we do and why we do it to the humans in the executive ranks, in the boardroom, in our staff organizations. It is absolutely appropriate that we evolve in this direction. But B, it is also nowhere remotely close to new. I remember the days I could literally flash back to December of 1999. I read an article that said, as we end one era and we enter another, a new millennium is dawning. And what we need to understand is that success for IT professionals will no longer be predicated exclusively on their technical skills, but rather on their soft skills and their ability to communicate and influence and even persuade. We haven't fixed that yet. right? Like there are more responsibilities on the CISO, more visibility to step up and explain to our board of directors, to our bankers, to our venture capitalists, private equity investors, et cetera. We need to look those grown-ups in the eye and say, we're going to be fine. All of that investment of trust and credibility and money that you are putting into us, we got it. We're professionals and it's going to be okay. If we are brusque, if we are abrupt, if we are condescending, if we are dismissive in our communication style, doesn't matter how good your technology is, you are not going to get the outcome that you desire. So communication skills are 100% appropriate. Just don't pretend that this is the first time we've heard it and actively resisted doing anything about it as an industry. That's been going on for a generation, right? Finally, now, headline number 4, Bradley, I want to come back to you for some insights. Cyber espionage group Bahamut, and I've heard it pronounced so many ways, I forgot how to pronounce it correctly. They have created a weaponized Android-based VPN app for data exfiltration and spying purposes. Zero of that sounds good, Bradley. What do we need to know?
No, you're right on that, Ryan. Yeah, according to a late 2022 report from ESET, the Hack for Hire group, their operation has targeted Android users since really the beginning of 2022, luring in victims with apps that are distributed via a website that appears to be branded as Secure VPN, but actually has really nothing to do with the legit Secure VPN service. MSSP Alert, in its own report, advises that any mobile-focused MSSPs familiarize themselves with this particular malware and campaign, especially if they have employees that use any of their own personal devices and might have downloaded such an app, which at times has appeared as a Trojanized version of the legitimate app's soft VPN or OpenVPN. And so that now, Orion, actually takes us to, drumroll please, our irrelevant news item of the week. Now, this is a real pitch that either Ryan or I have received in our inboxes for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to us. Are you ready, Ryan? Because here comes the pitch.
I am ready. I am anticipating. These are always so absurd that they are awesome.
All right, here we go. Fired from Wendy's because he couldn't flip a patty fast enough. Rick Keller went on to graduate from Vanderbilt Law School and serve as a U.S. congressman for 8 years. And now he shares practical, actionable secrets of success in his new book, Chase the Bears, Little Things to Achieve Big Dreams, which encourages readers just to not always play it safe, but actually take some risks to chase their goals before it's too late. Now, Ryan, this is an admirable stance and point of view for sure. I just think the metaphor here is a little bit of a weird one. The anecdote here is that he once chased after a family of bears in his front yard because he wanted to prolong the experience of witnessing this beautiful sight of nature. Now, to me, this doesn't seem like the wisest pursuit, which I think even Congressman or former Congressman Keller even acknowledges, even without me having read the book. But it seems like the risks outweigh the benefit. So I'm not sure this is the best example or metaphor. So, Ryan, I ask you, is there maybe a cybersecurity equivalent to chasing the bear in either a good or potentially dangerous way? Like maybe potentially example of chasing their bear might be trying to hack back someone who breached you rather than trying to just mitigate the damage and taking your losses. So, Ryan, when do you chase the bear, or should you chase the bear, and when should you just stay inside and lock the doors before the bear chases you back?
See, now, I believe all of us have the unfortunate experience over our careers, not even in our careers, in our personal lives, of self-inflicted wounds, right? Things that happen that are bad, that are terrible, that we brought upon ourselves. The very first thing that I will advise here, and if you will remember from the movie Men in Black, when Will Smith's character was chasing the alien up the tower at the World Fair site in Queens, right? You remember the conversation that was going on where the alien was going back and forth, and his advice was, "Don't start nothing, won't be nothing." Right now, in the wise and insightful words of Will Smith's character in Men in Black, as a cybersecurity professional, do not start things that you do not already have guaranteed confirmation that you will survive on the other end. I know it might be interesting. I know it might make your job a little bit more interesting on a random Thursday, but self-inflicted wounds are not only the dumbest kinds of wounds, but they are also the fastest way to the exit on your career path. So let's make sure we are not doing things that are going to cause us problems. But I will close by saying, not qualified to work at Wendy's, but qualified to serve in the United States Congress. Our brains will need to chew on that little conundrum for a few minutes.
Yeah, it's quite the upgrade in career, I have to say, and very smart advice, Ryan. I think that's a good lesson for everyone. And with that, we've run out of time. So, but don't worry, because we'll be back again soon for episode number 7. Meanwhile, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth.
And I am Ryan Morris. Please reach out to us via our show page and our email address to let us know comments, questions, any insights or feedback that you have on today's conversation, as well as future topics that you would like for us to cover. We will do the homework and the due diligence, and then we will keep this conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.